These filaments used to be plastic bottles, and they're being turned into polyester. The fabric makes up more than half of all of our clothing. And one company in India called Sri Ringa can turn about 1.5 million plastic bottles into polyester in a single day.
That is going to be almost more than tripled in the next couple of years.
Turns out there's plenty of appetite for it. More and more, fashion brands like Adidas, Nike, and Shein are trying to increase the amount of polyester made from recycled plastics in their lines, often marketing them as more sustainable. But why is so much of what we wear made from plastic to begin with? And how do you turn a bottle into clothing? The Sri Ringa company spins about 25 metric tons of polyester on a daily basis. The founder, K. Sankar, is proud of every filament his factory spins, but it took him decades of trying to get here.
I felt like doing something to the society by doing recycling.
Today, he runs the business alongside his son, Senthil, who quit his job in IT to help his dad.
I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur in India.
Globally, we produce about 600 million of these bottles every year, and most of them are not recycled. In India, waste pickers collect and deposit them at sorting sites like this one, where workers crush and bale them for sale. Every month, Sri Ringa buys about 900 metric tons of trash from companies like this one. But all it really wants is PET. That's short for polyethylene terephthalate, one of the most common types of plastic. At Sri Ringa's factory, the first step to getting it is separating the valuable bottles from the caps, labels, and glue. Mixing in other plastics could ruin the final material. But getting to pure PET is pretty time-consuming.
We have a lot of advanced sensing technologies, which are used to separate PET, PVC, all the other plastics.
Bottle caps are usually made from polypropylene, a kind of plastic that Sri Ringa doesn't recycle. So they sell them to another company that makes lead-acid battery cases. And all of the dirt and sand they collect from washing the bottles is pressed with ash to make bricks that decorate the factory floor. Then, machines crush the bottles into flakes. Bagged flakes are then loaded onto trucks and delivered to another part of the factory. Here, they are crushed again and passed over a sieve shaker, a machine that sorts the flakes by size, making sure they're no larger than 14 millimeters. Smaller particles falling to the shaker's bottom are used again to make PET pellets. But the flakes still aren't 100% separated. After a quick rinse, machines transfer them into a float tank. Here, the PET will sink, and other plastics can be skimmed off the top. They are then washed 10 times to remove any remaining dirt and glue.
Nothing is wasted in this factory. That water is again used back.
The plastic is rinsed one final time, leaving behind clear flakes, which are dried and loaded into these sacks. Now, it's time to turn them into fiber. And PET is uniquely suited for this purpose. It has long chains of molecules that hold tightly together, creating lightweight, flexible, and strong materials. The length of those molecular chains determines whether the plastic is used for things like bottles, packaging, or textiles. Chemically, PET and polyester are the same thing. Making fibers starts by melting the plastic flakes with colored pigments, a technique known as dope dyeing. The combined goop is then pushed through a spinneret, a metal plate with hundreds of small holes that can be adjusted for thickness.
When it melts and comes out, it comes in the colored form. We don't use a single drop of water, we don't use energy for our coloring process.
Sri Ringa currently makes 200 different colors of fiber. As they exit, the filaments cool and dry. After every use, the plates are cleaned using high-frequency sound waves, which create microscopic bubbles that collapse and remove anything stuck to the spinneret. The fibers are then stretched using a series of rollers which deposit them into these large buckets. Shutting down and restarting these machines is energy-intensive and expensive, so they have to run non-stop throughout the day.
If you have to stop, then it takes a long time for us to reboot again.
Workers weigh the drums and bring them into this area called the draw line. Here, 60 to 70 barrels are simultaneously routed through a series of eyelets, pulling them into parallel strips. Polyester tends to hold static electricity, so the fibers are dipped in a starch-based lubricant to avoid sticking together. Another series of rollers makes them up to 4 times longer. And yet another set of heated rollers stabilizes the fiber into its stretched state. This machine crimps the fibers, giving them a wavy pattern and making them easier to combine with other textiles like cotton. The finished fibers travel to the top of this platform where they are cut down to a manageable size. Finally, they are compressed, baled, and shipped to another company for further processing. At Sri Kanathal Mills, the fibers are spun into yarns using a series of machines. First, workers load them into a bale opener, which uses rollers and spiked drums to loosen the fiber. They weigh the sheet before loading it into a carding machine. It pulls the fiber over wire-covered cylinders that comb through tangles, creating a thin web that is then condensed into a loose rope called sliver. These sliver strands are coiled into large cans. Workers attach them to machines that combine several of the ropes together. Next, the slivers are run through something called a simplex machine. It uses a series of rollers rotating at different speeds to stretch the fibers and make them more parallel. The result is a more compact and uniform rope known as roving, which is ideal for spinning. Workers feed the roving through a spinner that twists it into yarn. Finally, the strands are ring spun onto bobbins. Senthil and his father used these cones to make their clothing. More and more brands are working with recycled polyester made from plastic bottles, including Adidas, Nike, Zara, and even Shein. In early 2024, more than 120 clothing companies pledged to increase their use of recycled polyester. Sri Renga launched its own recycled clothing brand in 2021 called Ecoline. Most pieces are made of 100% recycled polyester, but sometimes they're mixed with cotton.
So once the fiber was made, making yarns and fabrics and garments was just an extension.
Everything is still made in the same facilities. Workers connect hundreds of bobbins to a machine that weaves the yarn into sheets of fabric, which then head to inspection.
If there is some defect that is found, it will be marked with a marker. And once that marker is seen in the cutting section, they will cut that portion alone and keep it aside as waste. That again gets recycled.
All of the fabrics they use are laid out, marked, and cut into various shapes for garments. To add a design, Sri Renga uses a sublimation printer.
And once the sheets are out, we place them into panels in our heat transfer machine.
This device applies heat and pressure to transfer dyes directly onto the polyester. The company sells 400,000 garments a year and plans to triple production by 2026.
We are boldly betting on this, expanding our capacities, thinking that the future is going to be sustainable fashion, and we want to be well placed when that wave comes.
In 2023, the family received a huge boost after India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, wore one of their vests known as a sadri.
I was literally in tears. My product is owned by a Prime Minister of the country. Something wonderful.
It's something to convince someone to wear something out of trash. And that we've been able to do with Ecolab.
Clothes made from recycled polyester are often advertised as good for the environment, but they still come with an impact. Washing any synthetic fiber can introduce microplastics, less than 5 millimeters in length, into our waterways. Some studies suggest that synthetic fibers contribute more than a third of all microplastics in the ocean. And if it ends up in a landfill, river, or ocean, it won't break down. To top it off, recycling polyester isn't as easy as recycling a plastic bottle. Polyester is often mixed with things like cotton, spandex, chemicals, and dyes that must be separated before recycling. The cheapest and simplest method for recycling clothing involves shredding it, but that creates shorter fibers that need to be blended with the virgin ones to make new clothes. So they are typically downcycled into carpets and stuffing for insulation. Gap and Zara's parent company, Inditex, recently made major investments in an American business called Ambercycle. The company developed a chemical process to separate polyester from dyes and other fabrics, eliminating the need for virgin materials.
The idea for Ambercycle is really just, how do you take an old t-shirt and turn it into a new t-shirt instead of using natural resources? The most difficult thing is scaling up the process from pilot plant scale to tens of thousands of t-shirts. That successive scale-up is really hard.
It's especially hard when virgin polyester is so much cheaper and easier to use than new recycling technology.
Less than 1% of old clothes are recycled to new clothes. So we don't actually have large, or I would say commercial scale technology for recycling.
Meanwhile, fast fashion shows no signs of slowing down. And it's expected synthetic fibers could make up nearly 3/4 of all textile production by 2030.
Brands in the industry wider needs to invest more into fiber-to-fiber recycling. But at the same time, we need to realize that this is not a silver bullet,
Recycled polyester generates about 70% less emissions than virgin. And Sri Ranga has several certifications ensuring it limits the use of harmful chemicals and actually recycles the trash it buys.
From the end product, you can trace everything back to the origin. And we wanted that to be the core ethos of our brand. And we positioned it that way.
Some advocates say it's better to just recycle bottles into new bottles, since that can be done around 11 times. But less than 10% of all plastic actually makes it to a recycling center. So for now, Senthilan and his dad are happy to save any plastic they can from landfills or the oceans, even if it's only temporary.
For us, when you make it into a garment, it takes a longer time for it to reach the dustbin.
Though there's a lot of work to be done, he thinks Sri Ranga is well positioned to make the most out of plastic trash.
Whether it's recycling or renewable energy, this is the era of sustainability. And I think we're in the right space.